Managing corporate actions impact on an employee stock option plan. And to do so, I request Mr. Jalaj Sinha, Head of Business Development Qapita, to please come upon the stage. A very big round of applause for him, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, so I'm going to present a technical topic. Before going there, let's just take a quick vote as to how many of us have been associated with the employee stock option program, either as a handler of it, as a manager of it, or also as a participant. Yeah, quick show of hands. Okay. Yeah, so few of us know about stock options. They have been beneficiary or have handled. For many of us, this is going to be a new learning. Since majority in the room, they don't or they can't connect with stock option, I'll just give you a very brief understanding about how stock options work before I go into the presentation. So employee stock option is basically a right. It's an entitlement given to employee. This is in the form of a long-term incentive where employees they get this opportunity to buy shares of the company at a future date subject to fulfillment of conditions, which are known as vesting conditions. Now these conditions can be time conditions, or this can also be performance condition. Performance can be individual performance or company level performance. When the employee exercise their vested option, that event is known as exercise, and the company is obligated to issue shares to the employee at that event. Now what is important here is to understand the incentive part in the employee stock option. The price remains fixed. So at the time of grant, when the options are granted, the price is fixed, which is not going to change, which means that any appreciation later on in the period is going to be the appreciation which becomes the incentive component for the employee. So that is the brief about employee stock options. It is a regulated instrument. It is regulated both by SEBI as well as it is regulated under the Companies Act. So both public companies, listed companies and private companies, they have to comply with the regulations when it comes to implementation of the stock option program. Now, as far as this session is considered, we are going to cover the corporate action, and there also I will take an example of a demerger situation. So as finance leaders, there was a mention about the responsibility towards growth of the organization. So as finance leader, we are involved in many merger and acquisition activities where our advisory or our analysis helps the board in taking the right decision. So corporate actions includes demerger, merger, spin-off, selling of a business division. This can be simple corporate actions like right issue, bonus, or others also. So as far as this session is considered, let's set some learning objectives to it. So we'll see as to does corporate action affect the value of the option? That is the first thing. What are the requirements under the regulations, both SEBI and the Companies Act? When the adjustment to the stock options are necessary, what is the implication of accounting? So stock options, there's also a cost impact. There's a cost which enters the P&L. So as a finance leader, we also have to cover that area. And what is the universal principle applied in an option adjustment? So before we go to the next slide, any one of you who have handled a corporate action in the past? Okay. So in a corporate action, there may be a situation where the entitlement of an employee gets affected because option holders are not shareholders. So where the shareholders, they will get the benefit. Suppose there's a demerger happening, there's an entity which is getting transferred from the main entity to a resulting entity. The shareholders of the main entity, they will get shares in the resulting entity. But what about the option holders? Suppose there are options holders at the main entity. Now what happens to their option? They are not shareholders, so they will not get anything in the resulting entity. So there is a lack of, or there is a sense where the entitlement is getting affected for this option holder, because they are not shareholders. So in such a case, adjustments have to be made. And this is where it is also mandated under the SEBI regulations, where the NRC, NRC has the rights and the powers to authorize adjustments in the grant terms of that particular options. So we'll see that in the coming slides. So what is the best practice in the option adjustment? So as far as NRCs or the board, they have to take a decision. They have to take a decision basis to make a fair and reasonable adjustment. So fair and reasonable adjustments means, and what SEBI also advised is that the value of the options should not change in a corporate action with the option holder. So what SEBI suggested is that the change can be done in option numbers or the strike price or both, so that the value should remain same. There should not be any impact on the value of the option holder, which means that this event of corporate action should be neutralized by such an adjustment. SEBI further said that the life of the option should remain unaltered, which means the vesting period and the exercise period. Options is a derivative. So they will not result into shares on day one. They will result into shares after a certain period of time, which is a combination of vesting period and exercise period. So what SEBI says is that the life of the option should be left unaltered. So which means that the vesting period and the exercise period should not be changed. The value of the options should remain same. So the cardinal principle there comes in as the fair value of outstanding options pre-corporate action should be equal to the fair value of options post-corporate action. Now here the word is outstanding options, which means it is not just applied to vested options where the right has been crystallized, the conditions have been met. It is applied across. So even unvested options, the adjustment have to be made. Okay. So let us now see this in a light of a demerger transaction. Suppose there is a company A. This company goes through a demerger process. The company has a ESOP program which employees of this company are covered with. 25% undertakings are transferred. So there is a new entity which gets created, which we call as resultant entity B. And there is the remaining entity or the residual entity which remains at 75%. So this is a common demerger sort of a situation. This is how a demerger will look like. Okay, so the demerger here is a vertical split between the balance sheet and the P&L. So balance sheet will split between these two entities. The share capital also splits, and shareholders of A will receive shares in residual. I mean, they will continue to be there. They will receive the same proportion, shares in the resultant entity B. Now, if you see post demerger, there is no holdco, subco, sort of a parent subsidiary relationship between the resultant entity and the residual entity. So they will operate as standalone. In this example, we consider an employee who has received options at A, which is the parent entity, and he is moving to resultant entity B. Now, resultant entity B does not have any program. Now, post demerger, he will no longer remain employee of the residual entity A. So, under SEBI also, stock options can only be given to the employees of the company. It cannot be given to someone who is not who is a non-employee. So this condition will come up in case of a demerger situation where there is a transfer of undertaking. Resultant entity may or may not have a program, and the employee of the parent entity or the combined entity, as we say, is moving to the resultant entity. So what we do with his option, and this is where this presentation will gain more depth. Okay, so let's see in the context of an example. Let's say May 1st is the record date for this demerger. On the vertical, on the left hand side, these are the share prices, and on the horizontal, we see the days over which the price movement is covered. So this is the combined day price movement somewhere between 3,800 to 4,200, median level 4,000. What will happen on the record date is, okay, so this employee X has, in this example, 1,000 unvested options, which are granted at a strike price of 1,000 rupees. And these options will vest over next 3 years period, and there's a vesting period of 12 months. So this is the hypothesis for this example. Now, if we see the residual entity, how they will trade after the demerger. So the prices will dip. This is more like a, assuming market forces are not, playing their role here. So the prices 75%, which is the entity A, will start trading somewhere around 3,000, whereas the resultant entity B will start trading around 1,000 level. But now these two companies are separately traded in the market, right? Their prices are, differently ascertained, and they will have a different growth path in future. So what should be done here? That is the question, because the employee is moving from entity A to this residual entity, right? And his options, whether he should be compensated, that's what we need to see. So ESOP plan A continues at the residual entity. The company, which is the resultant entity, will create a plan which we call as ESOP plan B. In this adjustment, the company does exchange. I mean, it grants 1,000 options of ESOP plan B, and continues with the number of options which was 1,000 at ESOP plan A, and distributes the exercise price between the two by the same proportion at which the prices have, this share exchange ratio has worked out. So this is what the company has done in this example. Now the question is whether this is correct. Yeah, is this adjustment done correctly? That is the question. Now on the face of it, it appears that there's nothing wrong in this sort of an adjustment. What has happened is, if I just do the net worth on the date of record date, I will find the value would not change. Now there is a fallacy in this argument, because options are not shares. Options will convert into shares. So we cannot use the valuation principles which are used for shares on options. Options have value on the right hand side also. And this will happen over a period of time. This we'll see in the next slide. So let's test this example with our examination here. So we'll repeat it. Yeah. Now this is a 3-year hence story. Now let's say residual entity, this entity which is A1 we are calling here, grows at 25%. So from 3,000 level, it goes up to 5,800 something, and the resultant entity B, post demerger, the growth rate was quite good, 50%, and it reaches the level of 3,375. Now if you combine this two, the value of 5,800 and 3,300, it will be somewhere around 8,000 plus, which is what the value comes to after 3 years. Now if this 4,000 just were to continue, suppose there was no demerger, this continued at just let's say 20% growth rate, it will not be equivalent to that level. That is how the demergers work. Okay, so what we see here is giving the same logic for the treatment at the record date, which was given to the treatment of shares of this parent entity A, is not correct, because we are not considering the time value of the option, which is on the right hand side quadrant. Okay, so this value is something which is missing in the adjustment. Okay, so as far as option adjustment is considered, we have seen the cardinal principle was that the value pre and post corporate action should be equal. Now value, there is an underline, the fair value. It is the fair value. Fair value of what? Fair value of not shares, fair value of options. So the underlying part is the fair value of options have to be measured at the time of record date. And one of the inputs to fair value is the time value, which is this future period that we see in the graded. Now, what we have seen in the previous slide is that something which companies from where this is coming from. So actually, there are cases where companies have done the same thing by exchanging their options in the case of a demerger with the share exchange ratio. Now, this is not the correct position. We feel this is not right, given both the SEBI requirement over there, which is the compliance part of it, and also the valuation principle of shares and options are different. So this continues to be seen also. I mean, if you see some of these demergers which has happened, you will find this happening around. So what will be the right approach then, right? So the right approach is we have to value the option, which means we take into account the expected life of the option, considering the past volatility, using a Black-Scholes model. We value the options, pre and post, and then, arrive at what is the numbers which needs to be adjusted here. So, for a moment, let's not worry about the value of each options that has been just given as an example. So, if we see that if we do a fair value, pre-post, those values at entity A level vis-a-vis what will be the, post-corporate action value of resultant entity A1 and the resultant entity B and the residual entity A1, we see those values over there. What is important here to counter this fact that this 1:1 adjustment is not the right, approach. This has to be derived basis the fair value of options, which needs to be measured at each entity's level by applying this pre-post principle. So, if we apply the right approach here, the employee who is moving to resultant entity, this X, he should forego his options at A because he is no longer the employee of that company. And we will use the fair value calculated for the entities in working out that formula. So, how much value he was foregoing? So, he was foregoing 3,248. Now, this value which he is foregoing needs to be compensated with new options which are granted under ESOP plan B of the resultant entity. So, instead of 1:1, he should be given around 3.2 options in resultant entity B, which takes into account the fair value principle, which takes into account the graded part which you see covering the price movement during the future period. And this can be done at the time of record date. This is what is considered to be the right approach. So this is what I wanted to discuss with you. We come across such cases in our projects that we work with companies. From the experience, I can say when a scheme of arrangement is drafted, most of the time, this is not given that careful consideration. And once the NCLT, yeah, go ahead. Volatility. We use, so we use the volatility because the entity has not yet listed. So we have to use the peers. And we have to use the peers and use their volatility to input in that model. So we have to find the close peer in that group or in that business. So for example, there was a demerger of a company which was into health sector as well as finance. So they demerged the finance business into a new entity. Now this entity will not have any historical. So they have to look at peer companies from where they will get the volatility for that future period during that expected life of the option and apply it. Yeah. Yeah, there are. Yeah. Yeah, so it's, the scheme of arrangements are, there. You can look at Piramal Health and Piramal, finance. Yeah, so it will not be, I mean, they do it more or less on the first, which was adjusting it on the basis of share exchange ratio. So there is a share exchange ratio. I mean, shareholders of the holding entity will get shares in the resulting entity. In the same ratio, options were adjusted. And the employees received options in both. They continued with both, which is not right because you are separated. No? You are separating from that entity. You are no longer on the payroll of that entity. And SEBI definition of employee is that he should be the employee of the company which is granting the option. So you are creating this situation which is not correct. Even I give you an example of Birlasoft KPIT. So Birlasoft merged into KPIT, and then this entity from there, the services component was retained, whereas the automotive part of the business was demerged into another entity. So it was a mix of merger and a demerger, and every stage we have to apply this principle. So see, the problem is not just about, as I said, I was coming to that part, at the time of drafting of the scheme of arrangement, so the important part is that we should do a pre-post assessment before we finalize our options, how they are going to be adjusted. Suggestion here is, when you are working on a scheme of arrangement, you should carefully do a due diligence of the scheme. There can also be a position, suppose this resultant entity is not going to have any plan, what you are going to do? So acceleration of vesting or cash settlement of vested option, these are other things that you should keep into consideration. So it's a niche, it's a niche topic as such. Not much has been written about it. Even the proxies are not questioning it. The way it comes out in the scheme of arrangement, they may question it on some other grounds, business, valuation, share exchange ratio. But typically you won't find proxies questioning on the stock options adjustment. Okay. So now this part gets included in the adjustment. Just to wrap up there, corporate transaction affects the options value. Yes, it affects, because if it changes the entitlement in the hands of the employee, it is going to affect. When an options adjustment to options necessary, if the impact is material, if the value gets impinged and it is detrimental to the employee, you will have to adjust the option. Requirement under the SEBI and Companies Act we have already covered. Companies Act does not have any specific provision around corporate actions adjustment, but it is, since SEBI has it very clearly laid out, not only in the regulations but earlier when this was a guideline in 2003 and forward. So adjustments are required. Value for value principle in the option adjustment is a cardinal principle. It is globally accepted. This is how global companies do adjustments when a corporate action they face. Accounting implication under Ind AS 102 requires, if there is any modification to the options program, at the point of that modification, so in this example the record date, the company will have to do the this pre-post fair valuation of the options, outstanding options. And in addition to the grant date fair value, if there is any incremental value which is we determine at the time of this record date, will also have to expense that out. So that's an additional expense, which is what as finance leader we should be careful of. So I'll this is the presentation. I will be there outside. Just coming to few slides on the organization that I represent. So I'm part of Qapita business team. Our why is basically we want to support. Yeah. Yes. So okay. So suppose your employee compensation cost, your employee cost due to stock options program is X, let's say assume, and the modification or the incremental cost which is coming to is 0.0001%, so it is non-material. But if it is anything, if it is anything more than 5%, I will find it material. Again, it's subjective. It depends upon what is the cost. There are companies where the cost of ESOP program would be in the range of hundreds of crores. So if you look at ITC, their cost of employee stock option program will be in that range. So for them, I mean, this could be a very high number, even if we take a 1%, sort of. So ideally, if it is, I mean, the test of materiality is, it's subjective on the balance sheet. I mean, if we have to, take that cost into consideration, we should be taking it. That's what I feel. But before going to the materiality, the test of it is important to do that pre-post, valuation and find out what is that incremental, cost that is coming out. If there is a dip, so there is a legal question also in that. Suppose I do an adjustment, even with this share exchange ratio, and suppose this results into dip in the value for the option holder, right? I mean, at that date. So there, anything which we do which is detrimental to the employee's interest also needs to be fenced off. This is under SEBI regulation. So we have to be careful about what is the legal requirement, what adjustments that we are doing, the way we are doing, and also the materiality of that adjustment, right? So quickly, coming to the services that we provide. So we are at all stages of the ownership. We help companies on the designing, documentation, implementation of program. We also, do manage these programs when these are rolled out. So for which we have a, process-led automation. This is supported by a tool which is on the cloud. We are a category 1 merchant banker. We do work on the financial compliance valuations, Black-Scholes calculation, 409A valuation, share valuation. So that's another area. We have, and we are working towards this to solve the problem of unlisted companies' liquidity of, ESOP liquidity. So we are also, going in that area where we want to, streamline the transaction through a system and also find syndication opportunities for, unlisted companies' ESOPs. So this is, these are some of the companies we can see with whom we have the privilege of working with. These are on the unlisted companies. On the listed company side, we are working with almost 120 plus companies on the platform. Overall consulting experience is around 1,500 companies, which is both listed as well as unlisted, and including funded entities. In fact, it's an honor to have some of these logos who are present in this conference. They are our clients. We are working with them in one or the other services that we provide. We are with you today. So myself, my colleague Sudhanshu and Manan, we are outside. So please visit our booth. Happy to address any queries or anything that you want to know. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So suppose the acquiring company does not have a program. The target company in this example has a program, both vested and unvested are there, and acquiring company does not have a program. So the vested options needs to be converted into shares so that they become shareholders and they get shares on the top, right, which is the acquiring company. Unvested options either can be accelerated or can be cash settled in some form. Yes, so it's a part of your due diligence for both the target and the acquiring company to evaluate what is going to be the future of the stock option program. Because stock options are part of your cap table. And in any M&As or acquisition, the cap table has to be analyzed in depth, including all types of instruments which are there, including the stock options plan. Yeah. Okay, so I think there's a paucity of time been. Yeah. So we'll be there. Any queries, happy to answer. Okay, thank you.